everybody, it's Karen from Sugar Free Quilts here. I love all things paper piecing, and today I'd like to go over a few of the items that I have that are my must-haves when I go to start a project, and some of them are optional, and of course it all comes down to personal choice. I have my little bouquet of items that I like to use, and if you'll indulge me, I'd like to go over a few of my favorite things. Okay, so you've printed off your pattern and you're ready to get started with cutting out your template. And before we kind of go there, I like to print out my instruction pages in just the plain printer paper. But for the actual templates, I really like this Carol Doakes foundation paper. It's thin and it's like a newsprint, and it just tears away really nicely from the fabric once you've sewn it all onto the template. I find that printer paper is just a little bit heavy. It's certainly doable. I used it for years, but now that I found this, I just really love to use this. You can find it on Amazon. You can actually find it at C&T Publishing online. So wherever you'd like to source it, of course, you can use whatever you prefer. I'm just letting you know what I like to use. So here I've printed out my templates. I've got it on Carol Doakes paper. And then what I want to use to cut it out is you'll need a cutting mat. It doesn't matter what size. I like to use an X-Acto knife, and I'll show you why in a minute. I've got a ruler that I don't use for quilting anymore, because if I'm going to be doing this and scoring with an X-Acto blade, I might take a little nick off of that. So I like to keep that separate from my actual quilting rulers. You can use paper, scissors if you'd rather not use an X-Acto knife. Okay, here we go. We've got a bunch of supplies here that a lot of them are optional. So don't feel like you have to run out and buy a bunch of supplies to get you started. You can do this at very little cost. So what we do need is a rotary cutter, a cutting mat in various sizes, and a small ruler as you're trimming your work as you go. You will need an iron. I like to have a small one nearby because in the beginning we're working with small pieces. You can certainly use your regular size iron. Some people actually buy the wallpaper rollers and they just roll their seams until it's all done, and then they give it a good press. That's an option too. You don't have to have an iron next to you. I have one, I just don't have it off the top of my head here. Glue sticks can come in very handy. You can just use a regular glue stick that kids would use at school. I have one of these pens. They're refillable. Certainly not necessary. If you find you like paper piecing, you might find that handy. But this is certainly good enough. Pencil crayons. So sometimes here's a template from another project that just has different shades of gray in the template just to differentiate between the pieces. And this fabric would be different, for example, from that darker shade of gray. So sometimes it's helpful to color in, let's say this will be purple and that will be blue. So I've got these different shades of pencil crayons, and that's just really helpful when you're pulling your fabric and you're at your machine and you're not sure which one you need to use. That's really helpful to avoid errors. Some of these things, there's a why component to it, like why would I need that? And I will show you that in a little bit, but I just want to touch on some of the things you'd like to have first. This, use it every day. I really like the Clover stitch rippers, seam rippers. They're nice and narrow and really pointy here, so it's very easy to get in and pull that stitch out. Again, use it every day. Don't go anywhere without it. Of course, you will need thread, and you can use different weights depending on the effect you're going for. But again, that's an option. You can go out and buy whatever thread you are comfortable with, whichever one your machine likes. I like to piece with a 50 weight and quilt with a 40. So the lower the number, the thicker the thread. So with quilting, it's kind of nice to show that off a little bit. So I use a little bit of a heavier thread. And then of course your needle. Top stitch needles work really well, and it's always nice to have some extra, because if you hit a pin or if it's an older needle and you break it or put a little burr on it, it won't be as effective and you may have trouble with your sewing. So always have a couple of extra needles along for the ride. 1/4 inch foot, really helpful for quilting. Absolutely not necessary. You can use whatever foot comes with your machine. You'll be doing a lot of trimming, so a small ruler, this one is 1 1/4 by 12 inches. You'll need that for trimming your excess fabric as you go. Some people like these, they're called add a quarter rulers. If you can see, it has a ridge here, and this little space here is 1/4 inch wide. I've tried it. I like it. Some people enjoy them. So that's an option for you. But lately I've been sticking to these, and I'll show you why I like to use these in a little bit. So if I want to fold my fabric over on the line as I'm prepping to sew this piece, I find this really useful. I buy these by the sheet, cut them down to size. I don't buy the clear ones. These have the grid on them. I don't buy the clear ones because inevitably I find I'm cutting through them because you don't see them after a while. It's nice to have a little pressing station nearby. You can certainly set up your ironing board so it's nice and low beside you. You are going to be either pressing or using your wallpaper roller at every step. So if you do choose the iron, you're going to want to have that nearby. I like to set my station up in a U. So I've got my sewing machine in front of me, and to my right I have my pressing, and to my left I have my cutting station. And as every quilter knows, you need somewhere to throw those scraps. I have my little thread catcher here. I have my mini iron, certainly not necessary, but I do like that. You can get them even smaller. And if you're lucky enough to have a friend gift you one of these, it's a little portable iron. Is that not the cutest thing? Kathy gave me that. Just love it. Okay, let's cut out some templates. So here I've got my X-Acto blade, my ruler that I do not use for sewing. Again, you can use scissors, so it's entirely up to you. Don't go out and buy a bunch of supplies if you don't need them. So to start, just as a guide as to how to cut your templates out, I know you won't be able to see this, but I will show you a close-up. So I've cut just within this outer dashed line. The outer dashed line is the line where you will trim your fabric before you sew your pieces together. So as you can see that dashed line. That is going to go in the recycling bin. This piece, you no longer see the dashed line. So I'm just going to show you, I'm going to cut this piece out, and it doesn't have to be perfect. So now I have my template. So what you'll notice is this piece is not quite 1/4 inch. It's just a scant. You can still see that 1/4 inch line goes beyond your paper. Now here's why I like to trim my paper just within the seam allowance. So I'm going to show you, I've got all my pieces on this template right here, and I'm ready to trim it, because once they're all trimmed, of course, I'll put my pieces together. So I'm going to let me use this for a guide here. I'm going to lay my 1/4 inch line of my ruler on this solid outer line of my template. So it's all nicely lined up, and I'm going to trim the excess fabric off. And if you notice, I did not have to cut through my paper, so I'm saving my blade from dulling by trimming my paper just inside the seam allowance. So if you go ahead and continue to trim, oopsie, I think I might have to change my blade. So there, my fabric, oops, well this is a little wiggly, but my fabric extends just beyond the paper. So I will be sewing my pieces together, my different templates together along the solid lines, but when I cut off and trim the excess, I didn't have to worry about ruining my rotary cutter blade. And that is the only reason why I cut my templates within the seam allowance like that. So when we're paper piecing, we take each section, we add our fabric to one piece at a time, and we go in order, in sequence. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to add our number 1 first, and our fabric, when we lay it on the template, has to go extend beyond the lines of that particular section. So this one happens to extend beyond the seam allowance, so our fabric has to extend here. It has to go at least 1/4 of an inch beyond here, here, and here, okay? And so often paper piecers use scraps of fabric they have on hand, and so we want to make sure that our fabric fits on our template and then we're not ripping out. A way to do that is to hold your template with your fabric behind it up to the light, because of course we are stitching on the printed side of the template, but our fabric is going back here and we can't see the lines on the back of the fabric or on the back of the template. So one way to do that is to hold it up to your the light in the room, the light in the window. Another option, and again this is completely optional, is to use a little light table. I think I got this on Amazon for $20. They're not expensive. They're very thin. This feels like a hunk of plastic. It's not heavy. But again, this is an option. It's not something you have to have. So let's go ahead and turn it on. Whoops. Goes to a nice brightness. We are going to, let's say I'm going to try this scrap. And I want to lay it on top. That one actually fits, so we can see that it extends beyond all of the lines. I don't know if you can see that very well. It extends beyond all of the lines. I was thinking it was going to be too small and I was going to have to switch it out for you, but let's use a bigger one just to be clear. So it more than goes beyond the seam allowance, 1/4 of an inch beyond the lines on that piece. And that's why these are handy little items to have at your sewing station. Again, completely not necessary. The room light or the window will do just fine. So for our first step of applying our fabric to our template, we want to take the first piece and put it on the back of the paper, not on the printed side. Your very first piece of fabric, I don't know if you can tell here, that is the wrong side, that is the right side. When we sew, we always know right sides together. Okay, so let's pretend we've sewn that blue piece on and the next piece is pink. When you open that up, they're right sides together. So the very, very first piece is always right side down. The wrong side to the paper for the very first piece, so that every piece after that is right sides together. So this one we've got wrong sides down. We want to make sure that it extends beyond our seam allowances. Oh, look, I've got it just a little bit too far over here. So I'm going to turn this over. I'm going to position some glue just over that first piece, that number 1 on the template. Then I'm going to flip this back over, lay it down, give it a little press with my finger, and it's attached. right side facing you, and we're ready for the next step. And that's why you use your glue stick. I find it very useful for the very first piece of fabric you're laying down so that it stays in position. Okay, how do we use our rulers? Where do we go with step one? We've got our fabric, our first piece of fabric with the wrong side facing the wrong side of the paper. And what we're going to do is, this is the number one. The next step is to add number two fabric. So we are going to have to trim this line between 1 and 2. And we need that seam allowance. So we're going to, this is where this handy little piece comes in. See how thin it is? You can use a piece of cardboard that's really thin, like for example, Carol Doak's little insert from her paper. You can use a magazine insert that advertises a magazine, although do they even do that anymore? I guess they do. I'm going to show you, so I'm going to lay my plastic piece or my cardboard piece right up against the line between 1 and 2. So whatever number we're working on, we have to fold the paper against the previous one. So if I'm working on putting on number 4, I have to fold my paper accordingly. So I've got it against the line. I'm going to fold this over and give it a press. And I can take, that is our stitching line. So these lines are our stitching line. We want to give it a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I've taken my 1/4 inch line and I'm going to cut that excess off. Here's where you can use that, add a 1/4 ruler if you like, because this is in here or your cardboard would be in here. You can butt, see how that has resistance there? You can butt that right up against there and trim that just as easily. And you automatically have a 1/4 inch extended beyond. So that's why we use this, a cardboard. This, I like it. It doesn't break down. It's reusable over and over again. That's why we use this or this and always this. Before we go any further, I just want to say support local. I know in the video I said you can order things online, but whenever I can, I source locally. I want to thank all our fabric and quilt shops for everything they do. They are awesome and they are always there for us. So again, support local when you can. I want to thank you for joining me today, and if you liked what you saw, please feel free to hit the subscribe button. I'd also love to hear what your favorite products are for foundation paper piecing, so if you want to leave your comments below. Also, I would like to know what other sort of videos you'd like to see. Would it be a tutorial? Shoot me a message. You can follow me on Instagram at Sugar Free Quilts. You can reach me an email, Karen at Sugar Free Quilts. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. And oh, I'm getting kisses from my puppy, so I must go. Say bye, Otley. Otley says bye. Thanks again.